right, let's get into it. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming to our Facebook Live session. Today we're going to be talking about the Praxis writing exam, which is the grammar part of the writing exam. So the two exams are set up a little bit differently. With the Praxis, you're writing your actual essay, and your grammar score, multiple choice grammar test, is put together for a score. So I'm going to go ahead and hit some of these typical problems you're going to see on a grammar test. You're going to see these same types of things assessed on ACT, SAT, Praxis, any kind of standardized grammar exam. They test the same kind of skills over and over and over again. I'm going to show you how to do that today. This session today is focused solely on grammar and multiple choice questions you'll get on a grammar exam. Some of the things that I am going to be talking to you about today are mistakes that you make in your writing when you're writing the essay. Now, grammar isn't the number one thing that they're looking for when you write an essay. They're looking more for organization and continuity and an understanding of topics and things like that. However, if your essay is littered with grammatical mistakes, it is going to count against you. Grammar does matter. I don't think it's the most important thing when it comes to essay, but if you have a lot of mistakes and they're very apparent, it'll make it so the reader or the grader starts to knock off points. So this is a way to also get some extra points on that essay exam you might be struggling with. So pay close attention to this. I'm going to talk about test questions, and I'm going to talk about major grammar pet peeves of mine. And we all make mistakes. I make mistakes. I post things on Facebook. I leave out a comma on accident, or I've got mistakes in my book. So we all make mistakes. But the one thing I want you to be aware of are ways to locate those mistakes, not only in your own writing, but also in the test questions on the exam, so you can locate the correct answer. So a big part of these grammar exams is looking at the question and then finding the mistake and correcting the mistake. So let's jump right into it. One of my biggest pet peeves, and one of a test question that you will see on every single exam. So I'm going to give you a second just to look at this particular example. People do this all the time, and it drives me crazy. I hear it all the time on TV. I even heard a PhD put it in his speech when we were all getting our doctorates. This right here is a problem right here. So a lot of people think Aunt Judy was happy to see that my mom was sitting with my sister and I. And most people think there's nothing grammatically incorrect about that particular statement. But it is wrong, wrong, wrong. And you will see a question like this on every single test that you take when it comes to grammar, because most people do this. They put this I there, and they think they're sounding very scholarly and very smart. But in fact, they are very, very wrong. Whenever you see a pronoun at the end of a sentence, make sure that it is the right pronoun. Right now, I is a subject pronoun, okay? So subject pronouns are I, he, she, we, they, and who. We'll talk about who in a minute. Don't get too caught up with that. We'll talk about who in a minute. And direct object pronouns are me, him, her, us, them, and whom. Okay? Now, if I were to say this to you, you probably wouldn't hear a grammatically incorrect sentence. Now, be sure when you're taking the GK, ELS, or the Praxis grammar section that you don't think, oh, that sounds correct, because we have been speaking incorrectly for years, and things that are incorrect sound correct to us. So we want to make sure that we're looking at the structure of the sentence to also guide us in how we answer this question. So I have, Aunt Judy was happy to see that my mom was sitting next to my sister and me. And a lot of you have put me. And here's what you do to figure this out. Take out the other person. Would you say that my mom was sitting with my sister, or would you say my mom was sitting with I? Or would you say my mom was sitting with me? You would say my mom was sitting with me. So always take out that other person. People do this constantly, drives me crazy. You are not sounding smart just because you put I at the end. I hear it all the time. Don't do that. Now, notice that I is a subject pronoun, like I said before. I goes in the subject of the sentence. I was sitting next to my mom and my sister. I was with my sister. You wouldn't say me was with my sister. So I goes in the subject, and direct objects go in the predicate, typically after a preposition like this, with. So slow down when you see something like this. If you see I at the end of a sentence, slow down. They're testing you on your subject pronouns versus direct object pronouns, and never make this mistake again. You will hear it all the time after today, trust me. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions in the chat. Lots of people pick this no change necessary, and this is incorrect. I should be me. Aunt Judy was happy to see that my mom was sitting with me. Take out that other person. Okay. All right. Let's go to the next thing I wanted to talk to you about very quickly. So we have what we call subject pronouns and direct object pronouns. Now, we just talked up here how these are all of my subject pronouns. I, he, she, we. I went to the store. He went to the store. She went to the store. They went to the store. The pronoun is in the subject of the sentence. The direct object is in the predicate or after the preposition. She went to the store with him. Sally went to the store with me. So notice that the direct object typically comes in the predicate of the sentence and usually follows a prepositional phrase. The reason why this is important is because who versus whom fall under this particular skill. And most people don't know the difference between who and whom and when to use it. But you will see it on a grammar exam. You will definitely see it on the GKELS, and you'll definitely see it on the Praxis writing. So let's talk about that really quickly. In the subject, you will see who, and in the direct object, you will see whom. Now, let me demonstrate that with an actual test question so it's in context. Okay. After the accident, I wasn't sure who to ask for help. Okay, so let's just take a look at the whole thing. We have after the accident, this is underlined right here. Well, in this situation, after the accident, comma is correct because this is a dependent clause, and dependent clauses are always followed by a comma. Now, I will go over dependent clauses in just a few minutes, so don't worry about that. But that is correct. So we can cross off A. A is not the answer because we're looking for a correction, and A is correct already. I wasn't sure who to ask for help. Now, who is in the direct object place. Now, here's how you decide if you use who versus whom. Answer the question. You wouldn't say, who do you ask? You would say, whom to ask, because you would ask him. You would ask her. You would ask them. These are all direct pronouns, so B should be your answer here. Now, if I said something like this, who had the accident? Let's just make it simple. Who had the accident? This would be correct in this situation because you would say he had the accident. She was in an accident. They were in an accident. But in this case, I wasn't sure whom to ask because I was going to ask him. Sally asked her. Okay, so that's why we want to make sure we know the difference between them. Now, here's a quick thing to remember. If you see the words of or with, you want to use the direct object whom. Okay, the direct object whom. Just that's a quick way to think about it. Or you can do what I said here and answer the question. Whom did you ask? I asked him. And I always like to match the M's. If you can answer it with him or them, it's going to be whom. Hopefully that clears things up for you. It looks like a lot of you knew that already. Even if you didn't, no worries. Grammar is something that everybody needs to work on. And even though you can see it here in the question, Most people in real life are not using who versus whom the right way. So try to do it in real life. You'll sound super nerdy and super smart if you use whom correctly in a sentence. Don't use it incorrectly, because then it falls, and then you just look dumb. So if you don't know how to use it, don't use it, but try it, and you'll find when you listen to people, you'll be able to catch this error all the time because people are constantly doing this. Okay. Here is another huge pet peeve. Now, I just told you in this section right here that this I is supposed to be me. Aunt Judy was happy to see that my mom was sitting with me. Now, what happens when you have something like this? So take a look at this. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds or so, 15 seconds just to take a look, and then we'll talk about it. All right, so another huge pet peeve. I always wondered why she did so much better in school than me, or she is taller than me, or she works harder than me. No, no, no. This is when I is the proper pronoun to use here. Because what you're saying here is, I always wondered why she did so much better in school than I did in school. Is really what you're supposed to say, but most of us just go, than I did. Okay? Not than me did. I always wondered why she did so much better in school than I did in school, not than me did in school. So when you see the word than in a situation like this, no, 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 no with the me. Take it out. It should be than I, because you're saying than I did. And be careful of this as well when you're moving quickly in these exams. You have EN versus AN. And for my English language learners, this can be very difficult because when we speak English, then and than sound very similar when we're moving quickly. If I say, I always wondered why she did so much better in school than I, it sounds like then, but it's really than. So than equals a comparison. Then equals like time. I went to the store, then I went home, then I ate dinner, then I went to sleep. Okay, so that is very, very important. You will see these on both exams. For sure, you'll see it on the Praxis, and you'll definitely see it on the GK ELS. This one is something they're always getting people with, because when we speak now, we do this. She is taller than me. She is smarter than me. She is richer than me. Okay, that's how we speak, and all that seeps into our brains, and then we continue to do it incorrectly, and then when we're faced with it on the exam, we answer incorrectly. So pay attention to these. These are ways that test makers are trying to get you. So remember, what do I always say? Think like a test maker and not a test taker. Okay, all right, let's move on to the next one. She wasn't sure how her husband would feel about the new car. He doesn't like surprises. And I have this semicolon here. So I'm going to give you a second to decide what answer you're talking about, and see if you can decide the correct answer. And the correct answer is D, no change necessary. Now, don't be afraid of no change necessary on a grammar exam. This is part of the problem, or part of the challenge, is that the task of this test is to correct incorrect sentences, right? And so you're constantly looking for the incorrect sentence or the incorrect grammar mistake. And so sometimes people refrain from choosing D, but don't be afraid of D. D is correct, just as many times as A, B, and C are. So be cognizant of that. Now, D is correct because we have a semicolon here. A semicolon can separate two independent clauses. That means you can have a sentence on one side and a sentence on the other, and just put a semicolon there and it will work. Now, both sentences, both independent clauses have to be related. And in this case, they are. You have, she wasn't sure how her husband would feel about the car. She's talking about her husband and all that. And then you say, he doesn't like surprises. Notice that she wasn't sure how her husband would feel about the car is an independent clause, and he doesn't like surprises is also an independent clause. So the semicolon is used correctly. Now, let's talk about why the other ones are incorrect, because I think that's a really powerful lesson when we're talking about tests, so you can immediately eliminate. First of all, this right here, if you just had the car and then he doesn't like surprises, that's called a comma splice. And it's incorrect. It makes it a run-on sentence. You cannot use a comma to separate two independent clauses. Commas are not strong enough to do that. Commas can only separate a dependent clause and an independent clause. Okay, so this is the right way to use a comma, and I'm going to talk about that more in just a minute, so hang in there for a second. But you can never, ever, ever separate two independent clauses with only a comma. Now, you could put, instead of it just being the comma he, you could put, well, this one wouldn't really work here. You could say she wasn't sure how her husband would feel about the car, comma, but she surprised him anyways. Okay, she surprised him anyway is a sentence. She wasn't sure how her husband would feel about the new car is a sentence. A comma alone would not work, but a comma but would. I had to rewrite the sentence because but or and wouldn't work here. So that's why I revised this second piece. But a comma plus a fanboy would work here. Just remember, a semicolon equals a comma but, and also equals a comma and, all right? Also equals a comma yet, comma so. Remember, fanboys stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. These are conjunctions, coordinating conjunctions if you want to get technical and nerdy, and they are used with a comma to separate, let me get some of this out of the way here, to separate two independent clauses. We're going to talk more about that in a second. So A would be out, but you know, if you rearrange the sentence and use a comma conjunction, you could do that. Now, here's another thing they'll do on the test. Take a look at this one here. Because. Just say no to comma because. You don't need it. Here's a quick rundown. Because, however, although, even though, and therefore are called subordinating conjunctions, and they're considered strong. Okay, so you could say she wasn't sure how her husband would feel about the car, no punctuation, because he doesn't like surprises. The because can be on its own, okay? You can also start a sentence with because, and I have an example like that in another area, and I'm going to show you how the subordinating conjunction can be moved to the front of the sentence and still be used properly, and that's coming up in just a second, okay? So she wasn't sure how her husband would feel about the new car because he doesn't like surprises. That works, but this comma is incorrect, so that comes off. And now C, another thing to always eliminate no matter what. So if you see comma because or a semicolon plus a fanboy, and remember, fanboy stands for, let's do it again because somebody just asked in the comments, what does fanboy stand for? For, and, nor, but, or, yet. Coordinating conjunctions are fanboys. Oops, S, so, fanboys, okay? If you Google fanboys, it'll come up. And we also have it on our videos and in our books, and it's everywhere. So If you need more practice on that, just look it up on our YouTube channel. But a semicolon plus fanboy, just say no to semicolon fanboy or fanboys. No, 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 no. That's what my grandmother says to me when we talk about grammar. No, no, no. It's incorrect. Never. So if you see that in an answer choice right away, you should have taken off B and C. And that would have left you with D and A if you didn't really know. And remember, commas are weak, cannot hold two full sentences. And here we do have two full sentences. So A is out. D, no change necessary because this works. It's all good. That works. Okay? All right, let's go to my next slide. Now this brings me to my dependent versus independent clauses so you can identify them a little bit. In this sentence, we have an issue. This is a run-on sentence. You may see something like this on the exam, find the error or revise the sentence or whatever. We have two clauses in this sentence. We have a dependent clause and we have an independent clause. And when we have that, we need some sort of punctuation or coordinating conjunction or whatever to connect the two without it being a run-on. In this case alone, without any punctuation, it is a run-on. When we were young, we swam in that lake. Well, the independent clause is usually the thing that you can identify, and I really want you guys to pay attention to this when you're on the exam. Identifying the independent clause will help you identify correct answers, because notice, when we were in this one here, if I knew that both of these, both sides of this sentence here and here are both independent clauses by themselves, then I know what punctuation to use. So identifying independent clauses is very important. And in this case, we swam in the lake is an independent clause. We is the subject, swam in the lake is a predicate. If I wanted to say, we swam, that's not how you spell swam. Swam in the lake, and I put a period there, and I had a capital we here, it's good. It's a sentence. It could stand on its own. It's independent. That's why they call it an independent clause. However, this piece here, when we were young, is a dependent clause because of this when here. If we didn't have when and we just said we were young is a sentence. But when I add this when here, it's like when we were young, cliffhanger, yeah, what about it when you were young? You have to have we swam in the lake. When we were young is dependent on this independent clause. When you have that, you need a comma. A comma will separate a dependent and an independent clause. It will not separate an independent clause and another independent clause. Remember what I just said before. That is incorrect because that equals a comma splice, and we don't want a comma splice. A comma splice is incorrect. But in this case, we would need to add this comma here because we have a dependent clause and an independent clause, and a comma alone is the best punctuation there, okay? Now, if we said we swam in the lake when we were young, we could put we swam in the lake in front when we were young. You wouldn't need any punctuation, okay? Another way you would use a comma using because, remember we said this, where is it? Because he doesn't like surprises, comma, she decided not to tell him about the new car. Sorry, that was a super long example there. All right. Car. Okay. Because he doesn't like surprises, yeah, she decided not to tell him about the new car. Okay. This is because he doesn't like surprises is the dependent clause. And then the independent clause is after it. She decided not to tell him about the new car. I could put a capital S here. She decided not to tell him, blah, 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 period. And that would work. So you can start a sentence with because. It needs to be a dependent clause that's attached to an independent clause. You could also say, she decided not to tell him about the new car because he doesn't like surprises, and no punctuation is necessary there. So that's one way. These are called subordinating conjunctions, like I said before. And they don't need punctuation when they're in the middle of the sentence, but they do need punctuation after the clause that they start here. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions? And looks like some of you are helping each other if people didn't know, so very good. All right, let's keep going. So that is a comma, dependent clauses versus independent clauses. Here we go. Here is one just like we saw before. We tried to build the house on our own, but we soon realized we needed help. Well, right away, what can I do? I have this semicolon plus a fanboy. No, no, no. And where else is it also? In B here as well. Okay, so right away, D and B are out because you've attended Dr. Jasper's grammar sessions and you know that you do not use a semicolon plus a fanboy. Now I'm down to A and C. Well, I have this comma fanboy. Comma fanboys are good to separate two independent clauses. We tried to build the house on our own. Independent clause. We soon realized we needed help. Independent clause. So I can have a comma but here. A is going to be the best answer. C is a comma splice. C is out. I could take off this but and just have the semicolon there and say, we tried to build the house on our own. We soon realized we needed help. That works also. There's a number of different ways you can use it, but it must be used correctly. And so sometimes I see this in your essay writing. You're trying to be fancy, and I think it's good you're trying to be fancy, and you use the semicolon incorrectly. And what that does is it puts a giant light on the problem. So if you don't know how to use semicolons, don't use them in your own writing. If you're not comfortable with them, don't use them in your own writing. But be able to identify them used incorrectly on the grammar test, but just say no to semicolon fanboy, right? Now, this is one that they constantly do on standardized English exams. I'm going to give you a second to take a look at this. Most people would think there's absolutely nothing wrong with this sentence, and I bet so many people miss this on their grammar exam. So I'm just going to give you a second, think about it. Okay, a team of journalists are covering the story in Asia. Sounds perfectly fine when someone says that to you, but you have to remember the structure of the sentence. This is a subject-verb agreement question, and they will do this to you because they know you've been, exposed to incorrect grammar. You want to make sure you understand the subject versus the predicate and the verb, and then what the sneaky prepositional phrase is. I like to call it sneaky prepositional phrase. We have a team. A team is the subject. Of journalists, I'm going to do it like we used to do in school. Let's do a little blue here. We're going to map the sentence. Of journalists is the prepositional phrase or clause, whatever you want to call it. Okay, we're diagramming sentences here. And then we have the verb part of the sentence. Let's go with green. We have are covering the story in Asia. Well, what you can essentially do is cut out this prepositional phrase here. You could essentially take this out and throw it away, and it should read, a team is covering the story in Asia. The team is covering the story in Asia. You will see this a lot. So here is my advice to you. If you're like, how am I going to recognize that on the test? Whenever you see the terms are or there, and the there will make more sense in just a second, but whenever you see the word are in a sentence or is, depending on what they're talking about, they're probably assessing your subject verb agreement. In this case, the way it's written right now, a team are covering the story in Asia. The subject does not agree with the verb. Okay, so we have to correct it and make sure it does agree. And if I were to do that, I would need to put a team is covering the story in Asia. Now, remember, a prepositional phrase will be set off by a preposition here, of. And what you can essentially do is cross this off and read it. A team is covering the story in Asia. Notice that I'm constantly telling you guys to like cover up a piece of the sentence or pick it up and throw it out or take out the other person. When you do that, it's almost like a mathematical equation. Certain things have to fit. And in order for it to be correct, there is a method. People go, oh, I don't like grammar and writing because it's just kind of, willy-nilly. It's not. It's just as precise as mathematics. It's just that people don't apply that same type of precision to their writing or to their grammar. So you can essentially pull that out of journalists, throw it away, and you have a team is covering the story in Asia. Be very, very careful there. You see something like this, slow down, check your subject, make sure your subject and your verb agree. Okay? All right, let's go to the next one. Same type of thing here. We have the sneaky prepositional phrase. We have of directors, prepositional clause or prepositional phrase. But what is really going on here is we have the board, subject, is deciding how to lay off staff. Okay, so be sure that you pay close attention to that. Very good. It looks like you guys are bringing it in and seeing that is subject verb agreement. All right, here is another one. Pet peeve alert. It's pretty easy to like, I get pet peeved all the time. So when it comes to grammar, and I don't say it out loud because it's rude. You're not supposed to correct people, but we think it in our heads. We're very snooty in our heads. So the board of directors had their meeting on Saturday. Or I'm sorry, yesterday. Usually I write it on Saturday. The board of directors had their meeting yesterday. Most people would look at this and think, nothing to see here. Moving on. D, no change necessary. Here's what I caution you. When you see the word there in any sentence, including in your writing on the essay, slow down and locate your subject. Well, remember, this is a sneaky, oops, I did the wrong one, sorry. Of directors is a sneaky prepositional clause or prepositional phrase. You should be able to cross it off. The board had, and it sounds weird, but it is the right way to do things, had its meeting. In fact, this was on my graphic to advertise for today's Facebook. It said a student needs their or something like that, and I crossed off and put its. The board had its meeting because the board is one thing. The board, the faculty, the administration, the team, the university. The university could have 80,000 people and it's still a collective noun, and it is considered an it. Okay, so they will do this on every grammar exam. When you see the word there, slow down, go to your subject. Does it agree? In this case, it does not. So you're going to want to either A, change the subject, which probably wouldn't work here, or B, change the pronoun, which is, it works here because it's is the proper pronoun. Now this gives me an opportunity to talk to you about the difference between its and whose and whose. It's, this is both, these are both possession, okay? Possession. The dog ate its bone. The board had its meeting. Okay. These two are the contractions. Sorry about my handwriting there, guys. It is the board meeting today. And that doesn't make sense. It is her book. It's her book. Okay. Now with whose is also possession, but you're asking a question. Whose book is this? Whose car is this? Whose homework is this without a name on it? That is possession, because you're asking who does this belong to, basically. Whose apostrophe S is who is. Who's going to the dance today? Who's picking up Sam from school? Who is? So be careful with those. Those are tested as well. And, you know, for something like, where were we here? A might have been, let's just do a quick, and think about it. This is a way to think like a test maker right here. A might be, maybe they have something here, then here, then here, okay? And D is no change, right? They may do something like this. It's versus it's, and A might be something else. I don't know what A would be, but they could give you something like this, B and C there. Make sure you know we're talking about possession, so it needs to be its meeting. All right, good job. Looks like everybody is getting this. All right. This is where it can get a little bit weird, and people constantly do this. Constantly. This is another surprise pet peeve of mine when it comes to grammar. If a parent comes to my office unannounced, I often tell them to make an appointment. There are two problems with this sentence right now. Two problems. I'm going to give you a second to take a look at it. If a parent comes to my office unannounced, I often tell them to make an appointment. Okay, first of all, we have a run-on sentence. There's no punctuation here, and we have a dependent clause here. If a parent comes to my office unannounced, yeah, what? You can't just put a period there and walk away. You have to have the independent clause to attach to it. So we need a comma there. If a parent comes to my office unannounced, I often tell them to make an appointment. Remember what I said, when you see the word their or them, slow down and check your subject. Most people speak like this constantly. You will hear this all day, every day. If a parent comes to my office, I tell them to make an appointment. No, a parent is one parent. Them is a plural pronoun, more than one person. Now, typically, you will not be asked to change them to he or she because it's awkward. You don't want to say, if a parent comes to my office unannounced, I often tell him or her, sorry, it would be he or she. Wrong pronoun, right? Be him or her, because we're talking about the direct object. I often tell him or her to make an appointment. No, the best thing to do there would be to change the subject. That would fix it. If parents, sorry about that, don't know how to spell today. Parents, if parents come to my office unannounced, I often tell them to make an appointment. I see this all the time in your essay writing. And I know that grammar is not the number one thing that they're looking for on your essay when you're trying to get that 8 out of 12. However, if you get a nitpicky grader, and I would probably be considered a nitpicky grader, and you're constantly making this them mistake, who's to say that that grader is not going to take it off? Remember, these are humans. This might be someone else's pet peeve, and when they see it, they may just get, super annoyed and dock you points. Remember, the essay is a human grader. We don't really know how they're going to go that day. So to say that grammar doesn't matter is incorrect. It does matter. It always matters. Let me just say, grammar always matters. Always, always, always. So find this in your essay too. Proof, remember we did our essay sections or sessions on Facebook, I told you to proof. Be on the lookout for pronouns like them and make sure it's attached to students, parents, educators, not a teacher uses their knowledge. No, a teacher is one teacher. Teachers use their knowledge. All you have to do is change the subject and make it plural and it fixes it. So be on the lookout. If you see the words them or their, they are testing your pronoun antecedent agreement. So slow down and make sure the subject is correct and is plural if it's going with them or their. Okay. Oh gosh, I was like, what's wrong with this one? This drives me crazy as well. I'm going to give you a second to take a look at this. Okay, people that study have an easier time on the exam than people that don't study. Wrong, 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 wrong. People are people. People are who. This happens constantly. I see it in newspaper articles, headings, titles. People speak this way. Stop doing it. People who study have an easier time on the exam than people who don't study or who do not study. Now, one thing that this sentence got correct, which I'm happy about, is we have easier here. And then we have the other thing that we're comparing to. This is what a lot of people do. They say, students do better when they study. What's wrong with this sentence? Students do better when they study. Better than what? Students do better when they study than when they don't study. If you have a better, a more, a taller, a bigger, a shorter, whatever, you have to have the than. This sentence does. People who study have an easier time on the exam than, notice that the than goes with the easier, than people who do not study or who don't study. So that part is good. The than is good, but the people that, ugh, no. Make it a who. People who. People who. Students who. Okay? People make that mistake all the time, and it is on the exam for sure. Okay. Another huge, I was yelling at the TV last night. Fewer, fewer. I just gave you the answer to this one. So, because of the slowing numbers and infection, right there we have a dependent clause. The hospital needs less beds. Ugh, no. Fewer. Fewer beds. Let's talk about less versus fewer. You guys are going to be like, oh my God, Dr. Jasper was yelling at me the entire time on Facebook Live. I'm sorry, I get very heated about grammar, especially fewer versus less. Less goes with things that you cannot quantify, okay? You cannot quantify. So less goes for things like money, not dollars, money. I earned less money this year than I did last year, okay? I ate less food than I did today than I did yesterday, okay? There is less disease, okay? You can't quantify these things in the way they are right now. Fewer, however, is when you say things that you can quantify. I made fewer dollars. Can I count dollars? Yes, I can. This year than I did last year. I ate fewer calories. I can count calories, right? And we need fewer hospital beds. I can count. So fewer would be the most appropriate thing here. Less goes with things you cannot quantify. Fewer goes with things that you can actually look at and count, okay? You should use fewer plastic bags when you go grocery shopping, or I'd like to use less plastic overall. Hopefully that makes sense. You will see people doing that. I mean, last night it was crazy. It was like every 5 seconds. We need less beds. We need less beds. I'm like, fewer, fewer. I'm sure that's not the biggest. I mean, we are in the middle of a pandemic, so less versus fewer in the grand scheme of things is not the biggest deal, but you'll notice it too now that you've done this Facebook Live session. Okay. And then we have it here, use correctly. Because there is less disease, that is correct. Now, if I said, because there are less patients, no, no, no. Because there are fewer patients, because I can count the patients, okay? So the hospitals are using fewer masks. Less disease, correct. The hospitals are using fewer masks. Correct. Okay. So that is a basic understanding of what's going on when it comes to these particular questions on the exam. But for now, what I'm going to do is